So good morning, everybody. Welcome to this DIT webinar, UK Department for International Trade webinar today on the UK's net zero policies and environment. We're going to cover a cross-section of policies, and then we're going to have a special focus on hydrogen. So thanks for joining. So my name's Josh Lawrence. I am DIT's hydrogen, carbon capture and low carbon heating lead. So my job is to promote investment and to attract and to promote exports in those sectors. And what that means in practice is that I have some pretty good insight into UK policies in those sectors and how that landscape is evolving. I sit on a number of boards like the Hydrogen Advisory Board, mainly in a passive capacity, but I get that insight from it. And I have a good network of stakeholders across the UK hydrogen industry and low carbon heating and carbon capture industries, and a reasonable sight of what's happening in terms of industrial trends in those areas. But today I'll be giving you an overview of more broadly than that across other net zero sectors at a very high level before moving on to talk about hydrogen in a bit more detail. I'd like to take this opportunity to introduce some of my colleagues. So Charlotte, Mari and Marita, if you'd like to turn your cameras on and just quickly introduce yourselves, that would be great. Charlotte, do you want to start?
Can do. I'm Charlotte Blomström, the investment manager at DIT British Embassies, Stockholm, Sweden. Happy to help all the Swedes with any questions they may have about sort of how to set up or how to expand operations in the UK. And you can reach me through the chat or through the invitation that I sent you all earlier on. Very happy to help.
Thanks. Mari, would you like to go next?
Yes, hi everyone and welcome also from my behalf. So I'm based in Helsinki in Finland. So any Finnish companies, if you have expansion plans for the UK, please be in touch. I will write my email to the chat box.
And Marita?
Yeah, hi, I'm Marita Tanneba from the British Embassy in Oslo. Like my colleagues Charlotte and Mari, I'm supporting companies to set up in the UK. So any Norwegian companies wanting to set up, grow, learn more about the UK, then feel free to get in touch with me as well. Thank you.
Thank you, all of you. So we've kept today's session quite short. You know, it's 30 minutes with 10 minutes of questions. So as you can imagine, this is really just to give you a very brief update on what's happening in the UK, start some thoughts or progress your thoughts around how you might want to get involved in some of the opportunities and where the opportunity lies. And then we would love to try and help you with that following the call. So I'm not an expert on all of the net zero sectors, so I'll give you an overview of those before moving on to the hydrogen side of things. So let's start with the policy landscape. There's a whole set of different policies that have been announced, which can present a bit of confusion if you're not in the weeds of them and you don't follow them so closely. But the UK has a legacy of sort of quite forward-leaning policy when it comes to decarbonisation. We like to think we were the first major economy to make a legally binding target of hitting net zero by 2050. And we have a history of developing innovative policies to try and drive towards that. For example, CFDs for renewable electricity, which have been relatively successful by any means. So if we're looking from now until 2050, there are a range of strategies which have been published, which I think provide a lot of detail that you may be interested to read further on. And these set out the roadmaps, the long-term roadmaps between now and 2050 for the sort of policies, the work and the decisions that need to be undertaken between now and then in order for us to achieve those. So you can see here the net zero strategy underpins all of them. It's how we will achieve net zero by 2050. And then beneath that, you've got a number of other strategies providing greater level of detail on the work that's going to be undertaken So the heat and building strategy was published last year, as was the UK hydrogen strategy. There's an industrial decarbonisation strategy, and there are other zero emission strategies, etc. I haven't put them all here. So as I say, those are longer term, and then the Prime Minister has set a number of nearer term plans, and the one that I hope you've all heard of is the 10-point plan for a green industrial revolution, and more recently the British Energy Security Strategy, and these are plans with more specific focus areas and objectives through 2030. The British Energy Security Strategy builds on the 10-point plan, and I'll give you an overview of the 10-point plan now. So this is a busy slide, I know, but I think it gives you 1 to 10 of the focus areas that the UK is going towards. So the Prime Minister launched his 10-point plan in 2021 for a green industrial revolution. And this was, as I said, to build on the UK's legacy so far of sort of bold commitments at reducing emissions and deploying new renewable technologies at scale, as the UK has done with offshore wind, for example, over recent decades. It sets out the 10 areas of focus, from low carbon electricity, low carbon hydrogen, all the way through to green finance and innovation, which can help underpin some of the investments that UK and overseas companies want to make in order to take advantage of the opportunity. You can see this represents quite a large investment potential. Some of them are called out specifically. There's we think a £20 billion private sector investment opportunity in low carbon electricity, including offshore wind, 4 billion private sector opportunity for low carbon hydrogen, nuclear, greener buildings also, and in total about £42 billion worth of private sector investment that the government is trying to mobilise, and we'll come on to some of the policies in detail that are designed to do that. More recently, the British Energy Security Strategy was published earlier this year, and that was in response to the tragic events that have happened in Ukraine. It doesn't exactly mirror the focuses of the 10-point plan. I've put a star next to some of the ones where the energy security strategy doubles down, but it basically recognises the need to go further and faster and mitigate some of the energy risks that the crisis has brought as well. So, for example, the British Energy Security Strategy has some elements in it around securing domestic supplies of oil and gas, which weren't in the 10-point plan for a green industrial revolution, obviously. So targets have increased for low carbon electricity, low carbon hydrogen, greener buildings, advanced nuclear fuels. Offshore wind forms part of the low carbon electricity part of it. This was first featured in the 10-point plan, but went further in this strategy. So the target is now we want to have deployed 50 gigawatts by 2030, including 5 gigawatts of floating offshore wind. The British Energy Security Strategy also added in solar as a target for investment. With low carbon hydrogen, we doubled the target from 5 gigawatts by 2030 to 10 gigawatts. Previously the strategy was quite agnostic towards technology. The UK has always been very open about what we think are the advantages of a twin track approach, going for both blue and green hydrogen. But now, given recent events, we've committed to 10 gigawatts by 2030, with at least 50% of that coming from being green hydrogen. Nuclear, lots of progress and plans around deployment of new reactors, advanced modular reactors and small modular reactors. We'll come on to some of these in more detail shortly. Zero emissions vehicles feature heavily in it. There it's both private investment and public investment being facilitated. For example, the Zebra bus scheme helps local authorities to buy zero emission buses, whether they be hydrogen or electric or other forms. Infrastructure, green public transport, important elements of it, including electrification of rail, hydrogen train pilots, all sorts of things like that. Jet Zero, there have been a number of organisations looking at this. The BP has signed an MOU around sustainable aviation fuel and developing sustainable aviation corridors with other countries. So there's some exciting stuff going on there. Greener buildings is a massive focus of the UK's decarbonisation plan, and I'll share some more on that in the next few slides. But that's a big area of challenge and opportunity, which we think Nordic companies have a lot of expertise to share with the UK. Carbon capture and usage and storage, I think we have this in common with Norway. We've got a £1 billion infrastructure fund. We're progressing with clusters and have appointed 2 track 1 clusters in HyNet Northwest and the East Coast cluster, where we are aiming to have carbon capture and storage running at scale by the mid-2020s, so just in a few years' time. So that's an overall flavour of the 10-point plan, the focus areas, and the British energy security strategy. Just to pull out a few details on some of those specifically. So within the low carbon electricity sphere, offshore wind, solar, and nuclear all feature, as I mentioned. With offshore wind, the target is very ambitious, 50 gigawatts. That's by 2030. That's enough to power every home in Britain. There's going to be annual auctions to try and allow more entry into the market. A fast track consenting route will be developed for priority cases where quality standards are met. There's some legislative change that needs to be put in place there, and reducing the consent time is also an ambition of these plans, so we can move faster. Solar is a new feature. There's going to be amended planning rules to better enable solar deployment. Solar has already been included in the contract for different auctions that the UK runs for its electricity provision into the grid. And then on the nuclear side of things, up to 8 new reactors are expected to be progressed, 24 gigawatts of capacity by 2050, and various policies underpinning that, like the Great British Nuclear Development Vehicle and the Future Nuclear Enabling Fund. So we don't have time to go into these in more detail, unfortunately, but as I say, these are just there to prompt thoughts and get you thinking about where you and your companies might have a role to play and be able to help with a mutual opportunity. On the greener building side of things, so there are actually three main focuses of policy at this moment, those being electric heat pumps, domestic electric heat pumps, district heat networks, which we haven't been as fast or extensive at deploying as, say, Nordic markets have over recent decades, but there's a massive opportunity there now. And then also there's potentially a third, there's energy efficiency is another area that the UK needs to really move quickly on, making sure our homes are more energy efficient and better insulated. And then there's also potentially a role for hydrogen, and the government's committed to making a decision on the role of hydrogen for heating by 2026. So for heat pumps, there's lots of policies coming through. We've got a target of 600,000 installations per year by 2028, which is a massive ramp up. We're currently installing about 45,000 per year, so you can really see the speed of growth that's needed there. And there's lots of opportunity for components, innovative development of heat pumps, services around that, manufacturing, installation, training. All of these areas are going to be massive growth areas. To that extent, on the innovation side, the government has a £60 million heat pump ready innovation programme for companies to develop the next generation of heat pumps. The £450 million boiler upgrade scheme gives vouchers to homeowners to, instead of replacing with a gas boiler, to replace instead with an electric heat pump, while there's a cost differential. And not yet launched is the £30 million heat pump manufacturing investment accelerator. It's a bit of a mouthful, but effectively that's capital grants to bring forward manufacturing of heat pumps and components. The details of that are yet to be published, but they should be published in the coming month. The competition is expected to open in June or July, and then there'll be a window of applications, and it will probably close in Q3 or Q4 this year. So keep your eyes open for that one. District heat networks, there's the 288 million pound Green Heat Network Fund, which provides capital grant for the deployment of new heat networks, district heat networks. And the government has been consulting on zoning proposals whereby heat network zones would be designated, and any buildings or a certain set of buildings within those areas would be mandated to connect to a heat network if one is to be built there. So that should give assurance around investment into heat networks. Finally, the third sector I just pulled out to cover was zero emissions vehicles, and this isn't my specialist area, but there's lots going on here. You know, to make zero emissions vehicles more affordable for consumers, and also to help local authorities to make the changes needed, both with local transport but also public charging and things. So it's making them more affordable. The policy is focused on rolling out the infrastructure required, and how to transform the auto industry supply chains towards electric vehicles, and then also preparing the energy system for large-scale adoption, because of course with the ramp up of electric cars we're going to need a much bigger electrical system. So the policy is trying to create the right regulatory environment for the transition, invest in skills and capabilities. And you can see here a range of policies to support that, including making them more affordable to consumers through tax write-downs and tax breaks, funding towards public charging, funding towards private homes charging, and then funding towards development as well. We will share the slides afterwards, so you can take a look yourselves. So let's move on then to hydrogen in particular. A bit of a short focus session on what's happening in the hydrogen sector and where specific opportunities exist for overseas companies that are interested in supporting the UK through its transition. So for this, I'll give a bit of context for hydrogen in the UK, and then I'll focus your attention on the Net Zero Hydrogen Fund and the hydrogen business models, and finally the Industrial Hydrogen Accelerator. So to set the context, you know, like any major economy, these are the areas where we see hydrogen playing a significant role, albeit by different timescales. But certainly, you know, the way the UK is looking at this, we may have scenarios where we adopt more hydrogen quicker, more quickly, or we might have scenarios where we adopt less quickly, or more slowly. And depending on where that curve goes and how successful we are, different levels of hydrogen will be needed. But you can see that the main uses are going to be transport, certainly in the near term. That's the main area. Industry, and we'll come on to industrial fuel switching. Power, there are already hydrogen-powered power stations, hydrogen-fired power stations being planned. Equinor and SSE have announced plans for one up in the northeast of England. And then heating buildings, well, that will depend very much on the 2026 decision around the role of hydrogen for heating. But lots of opportunity, large volumes of hydrogen required is the key message here. And the key policies that are currently in place, well, we've mentioned the target. That's obviously what's driving this. We want to have 10 gigawatts capacity deployed by 2030. To achieve that, there are two main funding programs on the production side: the Net Zero Hydrogen Fund and the hydrogen business models, which are capital and revenue mechanisms respectively. And then the low carbon hydrogen standard will define, or does define, what actually constitutes low carbon hydrogen. And then on the demand side, there are two main policies sort of stimulating use of hydrogen at the moment, but more to come. Those are the Renewable Transport Fuel Obligation, which helps to ensure hydrogen is supplied to the transport sector and used there, and industrial fuel switching. Also, there's a number of innovation programs to try and drive that agenda forward. This is the delivery plan. So I think this is a helpful view forward of all the different aspects of hydrogen that are being developed. Those on the left have already been done, and those from here from 2022 onwards are still to come. Some key ones to call out: the launch of the Net Zero Hydrogen Fund has begun, but there will be additional strands opening in early 2023. The design of the business models are expected to be completed by the end of the year, which will then allow for revenue support to be allocated. And you can see that, where's the launch of that? The first hydrogen business model contracts are to be awarded in 2023. There will be neighbourhood-sized hydrogen heating trials happening, village-sized hydrogen heating trials happening, followed potentially by a whole hydrogen town. The decision for hydrogen heating you can see here in 2026. There's a second round of business models, revenue support for transportation and storage that is expected by end of 2024. So, you know, I think this is useful to help see the plan, to see the timeframes of when all of this is happening. And here I wanted to just give you a flavour of the pipeline of projects, because you know, the UK was some would say late to the table in publishing a hydrogen strategy, but to have a hydrogen strategy doesn't mean to say that you're being successful in developing a hydrogen sector. And there was a lot going on in the UK even prior to us publishing one. And now one has been published. What you can take from this slide is that there is a really large number of hydrogen projects spread across the entire UK, a mixture of green hydrogen, blue hydrogen, transportation and storage and distribution projects developing. And I think this is quite handy because this really does represent the opportunity, you know, for supply chain, for services, for the use of hydrogen. You know, there's about 20 gigawatts of capacity identified here through to about 2037. Depending on when they all come online. So, you know, it's a massive pipeline of varying sizes. And you can see some of the expected designated end users as well here on the lower right. Again, majority transport in the near term, but industrial heat playing a large role, industrial power, and just power generally. So I think it's clear to see, although we've had a twin track approach, the majority of projects are green hydrogen projects, with some very large major blue hydrogen projects in the industrial clusters. So we're very much a twin track approach, but as the new energy security strategy says, actually at least 50% could well be green hydrogen. So some specific opportunities. This slide sets out some of the policy landscape and the funding schemes that are coming through or already in progress. You know, just to call out a few, you've got the IFS phase 2, which is the industrial fuel switching competition that opens in autumn this year for bids. You've got the Industrial Energy Transformation Fund, which is a £315 million programme aimed at high energy use businesses to cut their energy bills and reduce their carbon emissions by investing in energy efficiency and low carbon technologies. Phase 1 of the IETF was around the studies, feasibility studies, pre-feed studies. Phase 2 is around actually investing in those technologies and deploying them and seeing how that works. So phase 2 will be £220 million between 2021 and 2025. And the summer window is open for the IETF phase 2, and that closes in September this year. Alongside this, you can see the Industrial Hydrogen Accelerator, which I'll tell you more about on a slide coming further forward. And you can see, as I've already mentioned, the Net Zero Hydrogen Fund and the hydrogen business models, which I'm going to tell you about now. So the Net Zero Hydrogen Fund, this is basically a capital expenditure, CapEx grant scheme to help really kick off the first set of hydrogen production projects as soon as possible. So it's initially 240 million pounds delivered between 2022 and 2025. And the idea of it is to use these grants to de-risk projects while the market isn't there and help to unlock private capital. And it can be, you know, and you can see on the right here, there are 4 different strands, 1 to 4. Strand 1 and 2 have already launched. Strands 3 and 4 have not. But this is just the first window. There will be a whole nother window for applications for 1, 2, 3, and 4 next year as well. So even companies or projects that don't apply this year will have future opportunities either for their project or for new projects. So as you can see, strand 1 is around DevEx, so that's feed studies, providing money to help companies do feed studies. Strand 2 is actual CapEx grants to go ahead and invest in the capital. But strand 2 projects are not expected to require business model support or revenue support. If you want both this CapEx funding and revenue support, then you would apply for strand 3. And if you're a CCUS enabled project that wants CapEx funding and revenue support, then you would apply to strand 4. So I hope that's not confusing, but effectively there are 4 different strands depending on what your project is and what it needs. If it's green without needing revenue support, it's strand 2. If it's green and needs revenue support, it's strand 3. If it's a blue hydrogen project and needs revenue support, it's strand 4. So hopefully that's reasonably clear. But really, you know, what these are about is making sure projects have a credible plan and that they're in place to be contributing to the at-scale production that we want to have running by 2025. I've mentioned that an additional round of application windows will come next year. You can apply to have multiple sites aggregated as one application. The producer can be the same as the off-taker. So if you're an industrial user, you could apply to develop your own hydrogen production for your own use. You don't have to be supplying it to the market, for example. And I'm aware of a number of projects that are doing that. And finally on this, we're looking to allocate funding for up to 250 megawatts of electrolytic projects in 2023. So that was the capital grants side, but there is also a recognition that for a good few years, the price of low carbon hydrogen could be higher than counterfactuals, will probably be higher than counterfactuals, and it may be difficult for producers to sell their hydrogen. So that's what the hydrogen business models are for. You can apply for revenue support, which will help you to make up the difference in the price that you're able to sell it at versus costs. So this is a CFD, contract for difference type mechanism to subsidize hydrogen production facilities. And I've included here a little chart just to show sort of how the Minded 2 system works. So using natural gas as the reference price, if your sales price is below what it's costing you to produce it, then you will receive a subsidy to help make up that cost. And the idea of this is to mitigate that price risk and also to some extent to mitigate volume risk as well. Then you may just not be able to sell your hydrogen full stop. And the approach that the government's taking for that is to gear the subsidies at a higher rate earlier on in the programme. And the expectation is that as the market develops and the volumes being sold increase, the need for this revenue support system will reduce over time. So the first contracts for this are expected to be awarded in early 2023. But there are indicative heads of terms if you're interested in seeing what they look like. So finally, the Industrial Hydrogen Accelerator. So this is more on the innovation side. It's a challenge for industry to transition from existing natural gas or other fuels to using hydrogen. And so this is about, it's a competition designed to ensure industry has options available and is ready to start switching to hydrogen when the main hydrogen production projects come online in the mid-2020s. So this is about demonstrators, the full technology chain from hydrogen generation through to fuel delivery, through to industrial end use in a single project. It is currently open for applications, but closes on the 21st of July. And then the end-to-end projects expect to be demonstrated April 2022 through to 2025. So I think what I recognise everybody on this call who has an interest in hydrogen may not be a hydrogen developer or with production technologies necessarily directly related to production. But I think what I hope that you will take from these competitions and from the pipeline slide is that there are lots of programs ongoing, starting, ongoing, completed, which are going to need expertise from Nordic companies to either to supply them, to help deploy them, to help design them, to help expand them once they've been demonstrated, or to commercialize them, and that's what I hope you'll take away from this. So that's a very quick 30 minutes intro to sort of net zero in the UK, and with a few specific examples of what's happening in the hydrogen sector. So I guess at this point we'll pause then and open it up to any questions.
Josh, this is Charlotte in Stockholm. I have received a question here, but how can the Department for International Trade support companies who want to set up in the UK and pursue opportunities? Could you say something about that?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think our network is our biggest asset. We can put you in touch with potential partners. We can provide more detail on where projects are happening, what the scope of them is, what policies are there that might support activities that you have in mind. So we have a really great network for doing that, but we also have a free service that we offer to companies to help them land in the UK, which can help with all the practical side of things. So, you know, site location, site searches, free access to free ports where you can get various tax breaks and things like that. Access to specialist advice, you know, and then all the sort of administrative stuff like, you know, setting up bank accounts and labour markets insight and that sort of thing. So, I mean, really, you know, we are trying to be a bit of a one-stop shop to help investors, but you know, and we will try and help you in whatever way you need. But we can offer everything from kind of specialist advice, specialist insight into the policy environment and industry, as well as the more practical side of things for companies looking to get into the UK.
Thank you, Josh. Any more questions from anyone, or? Yes, we have a hand up here from Sami. Sami, do you want to go online and ask Josh your question directly, perhaps?
Yes, morning. So I'm Sami Chung from Alfa Laval. So we are a Swedish company, but we have presence in the UK and have done for almost 100 years now. We do hear of projects requiring UK content. We don't manufacture in the UK. How does that affect, you know, how is it measured, UK content in these projects that are coming down the pipeline? Is there a mechanism?
So yeah, it varies by the policy, Sami. Thanks for your question, by the way. It varies how these things are measured. But I mean, you know, the UK is one of the most open countries in the world, and we're committed to WTO, you know, WTO commitments. So there aren't usually mandated local content requirements, as far as I'm aware. I think most of the consideration there is just trying to assess what the economic value is for as part of the proposals and things. But I think perhaps that's a question I can take away and give you a more detailed answer on, if that's all right.
Yeah, no, sure. Thanks.
Any other questions? I think, Josh, your presentation was crystal clear. That's why we don't have any questions.
Well, that's okay. You know, as I said, it's.
Oh, one more from Jonas. Jonas Kampf, please go online. Ask your question to.
Thank you. One question is, of course, that we have realized is that due to Brexit, there's been a sort of some difficulties, for instance, in the previously quite useful grant system for new projects in Europe, in different areas in Europe. And suddenly the UK is not included in this grant type of system anymore. Is there some other kind of system that can be useful for us who like to develop projects in the UK?
Thanks, James. Do you mean, are these more on the research side of things, innovation side of things?
Yes, more of an innovation or at a pilot side of things.
Yeah. So, I mean, BEIS has a number of innovation programs which provide funding. BEIS is the Business, Energy and Industrial Strategy Department, and they have a whole arm called Innovate UK and UK Research and Innovation. And what I'd like to do is send you a link to that, because they have a whole host of research programs which do provide funding and are funding streams that you could access. On the European side of things, I mean, I think the discussion is still ongoing around UK accessing, for example, the Horizon program. So that's the jury's still out on how that will manifest. But I know that the government has committed to sort of, if we don't access some of those programs, to sort of having equivalent research funding programs for the UK specifically. So it is a bit uncertain at the moment, but I think certainly for the renewables and low carbon area, BEIS and Innovate UK have a number of interesting funding streams which are open to any companies. The projects have to be in the UK, but any company can bid according to certain criteria. So I think the answer is yes, there are funding streams, and it's those ones which we can share with you. In fact, some of the ones that I presented today, I think all of the innovation ones are delivered through Innovate UK and UK Research and Innovation. So, for example, the Hydrogen Accelerator competition, the Heat Pump Ready Innovation Fund innovation program, the Industrial Energy Transformation program, and the Industrial Fuel Switching competition. Though all of those are, they're non-European linked as far as I'm aware, and are open to companies to bid to.
Great, thank you. That will certainly help if you can share that. Thank you.
Me too.
Anything more? Any more?
I think we're bang on time, 40 minutes. So
Yes.
perhaps we end it there, and if people have further questions, we can share the slides and can take them offline.
Yes, we have recorded a session, and we'll be sending a link to you all shortly. And if we don't have any more questions for Josh this morning, I want to thank you all for attending and listening in, and it's been great to have you, and I hope you have a fantastic day. And please, please come back if you think we can be of any help to you. Okay, thank you all, and thank you, Josh.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.
Thanks.